1,200 calorie diet is what a toddler should be eating.
Wow.
So if you put that into perspective, especially athletes that are in high school, in middle school, they're still growing. That means you're going to need probably 2 to 3 times that.
If you or someone you know on your team is struggling to perform at their best on the mat, you're not going to want to miss this exclusive interview that I have with Ashley Steinberger. Also known as the Cheer Nutritionist, Ashley unpacks how to change the mindset of the athlete in today's cheer culture, as well as tips on how to find the right fuel for their body. So if you're a coach, a parent, or an athlete, this video is for you. In this video, Ashley talks about the fuel that drives us to practice and perform in a healthy and optimal way. She also shares her own story of being an all-star, high school, and collegiate cheerleader, struggling with the negative mindset of having to have the image cheerleaders should have. So let's get into part 1 of my interview with Ashley Steinberger. Well, Ashley, thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you for the amazing, amazing content that you provided CCA. When I announced the course back a few months ago, I knew that this was one of the more exciting ones that I was looking forward to. And you completely over-delivered. So first of all, I want to say thank you for that. And for those who don't know you, this is Ashley Steinberger. I'll let her tell you a little bit more about herself because she's got a resume that could last this entire hour. But she knows cheer, she knows nutrition, and she has all of the credentials that you need in order to give her some credibility. So I hope that you trust her when it comes to this, because what she gives you guys is 100% legit. We're going to get into that a little bit more today, but one thing we're going to get into is the root cause of where nutrition is and where nutrition stands in the cheer world today, right? As well as how we can improve it going forward. So Ashley, tell us about yourself.
Thank you, Chad. So yes, I'm Ashley Steinberger. I am the founder of the Cheer Nutritionist. But before we get to that, I want to give you a little rundown of how I got to where I am today. So I was an all-star cheerleader for 10 years. I started locally, and then I was on World Cup Odyssey from 2010 to 2014 as a main base, basket flyer, and tumbler. During the time, I also was cheering for my varsity team at my high school, only football because we weren't allowed to compete with both all-star and high school. So then after that, after being a base my whole life, I'm 4'10". So I was a very short base. My flyers were always taller than me, kind of just made it work. I was strong, so it worked. But I realized quickly once looking into colleges, I knew I wanted to cheer in college. And I realized that I probably wasn't going to be able to base at the college level because, we get bigger as we go into college and, we're still growing. And I, was done growing. So I learned how to co-ed stun. I went to a bunch of clinics and I had a coach that really taught me everything I know at World Cup. And then I made the University of South Carolina co-ed team in 2014. And during my time there, I was co-ed flyer. I also ended up competing with all girl my freshman year as an alternate. And I also coached at ACX while I was there. Going into college, I kind of thought, I'm going to be considered an athlete, right? We're going to get the nutrition. We're going to get all these perks of being an NCAA athlete, right? Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. And I don't think that's the case really at any college.
No.
And I definitely struggled during my college years, but also a little bit in high school with disordered eating, things like that. And not having that support in college kind of made me think, why aren't we getting this support when it comes to nutrition? We are athletes. Just why aren't we being noticed as athletes? So I decided to intern with the sports dietitian at South Carolina my senior year, and I fell in love with it. So then once I graduated, I decided that I wanted to go back to school for nutrition. So while I was taking my prerequisites, I still wanted to stay in cheerleading. So I coached at Jersey All-Stars at home. before going back to school at Columbia University to get my master's in nutrition and sports physiology. So then I just graduated with my master's in May. And for my thesis to graduate, I decided, go back to my roots and combine my two passions of sports nutrition and cheerleading. So I came up with this program, which is now shifted into the Cheer Nutritionist. And through my internship, after I graduated, I was still doing my dietetic internship in order to sit for the RD exam. I really had a focus on sports nutrition and eating disorders. I worked at Columbia Athletics. I worked at the U.S. Olympic Committee. I worked with a bunch of private practices that were specializing in eating disorders, as well as Mount Sinai Eating Disorder Center. So I do have a well-rounded background in sports nutrition and eating disorders. And this kind of just further fueled my need to give back to this sport, because I know that this is happening in our sport. I know I couldn't be the only one. So I officially became a registered dietitian in the beginning of September. And the following week, I made the Cheer Nutritionist into a business. Didn't waste any time there. So since then, I have talked to teams and parents and athletes across the country, both virtually and in person, either team talks, one-on-one counseling. Those kind of are the main services I offer. But basically, my mission is to help cheerleaders fuel for their sport and prevent injury, and to help them reach their full potential. Because I know that sports nutrition is critical to performance. So I provide my athletes, coaches, cheer moms and dads with the tools and nutrition support they need so they can be confident in their food choices and also create lasting behavior change, both in their sport and beyond their sport, because we know cheerleading ends eventually for everyone.
It does. And sometimes faster than you want it to. But I think that this is why this collaboration was meant to happen, because we both had the heart of a teacher. And that's all we want to do is just educate both the athletes, the coaches, and the parents on how you prepare your athletes to perform better. But not only to perform better, but also to have a healthy life, both mentally and physically.
Yeah. And I think that's the key, because when you're in cheerleading for so long, you are living on this schedule. You have practices, you have competitions on the weekends or games on the weekends. You have a strict schedule to follow at all times. And then once that abruptly stops, when cheerleading ends, you're kind of just like, oh, what do I do now? And usually that time comes either while you're in college, if you didn't end up cheering in college, or after college, where you're also on your own for the first time. So there's a lot of different factors that come into play where you're living on your own, maybe for the first time, or even living with roommates or not living with your parents, and they're not cooking for you anymore. They're not taking care of you from that sense. So I aim to help set these athletes up for success, both in their sport, but beyond their sport, so they can have the autonomy to do these things themselves when it comes to fueling their body and living healthier lives.
Yeah, it's so important. And we'll get into that in a minute. But having the knowledge and having the mindset will help you change your behavior.
Yep.
Health and fitness is relatable to any other aspect in life. But I heard somebody say this one time, you can't control much that happens in your life, right? But the one thing you can control is what you put in your mouth. That's one of the one things in your life that you can control.
100%. And when you put good things in your body, you're going to get good things out of it. When you're fueling your body well and fueling your body the right way, you can get even better. Yeah. And so many cheerleaders have been making it through without a lot of this, right? But just think of the potential of how good they really could be when they were fueling their bodies like the athletes that they are.
You use the word fuel, and that's in the title of 3 of the lessons that you provided CCA. And we'll get in on an overview on those in a minute. But on the fuel thing, it's like you can't buy a diesel truck and put regular fuel in it and then expect it to run.
Yep. It's just like a car.
Or you can't buy a sports car, like a high-end sports car, like a Lamborghini, and put regular unleaded fuel in it.
That's an analogy we actually use a lot in sports nutrition. I like to change it a little bit for cheerleaders because, not everyone knows how a high-powered car works, right? But you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what it is. If you're going to put regular in a car that needs, the top end, it's not going to run right. It's not going to be the same. It's not going to last as long. The same thing goes with the body. If you're not putting the right things in, it's not going to last as long.
I know. And that's why I feel, and we both feel, that this is such an important topic to cover. When I decided to create this course, this one and the strength and conditioning one was at the very top of the list, because I feel that neither of those gets enough when it comes to education.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up never having a strength program to follow as a cheerleader. I mean, we had conditioning during practices, of course, don't get me wrong. And we were encouraged to go to the gym after practice or before practice, off days. But we never had anything to follow. And that's something I found so helpful. Once I graduated, I did an internship at Princeton University and I was a strength and conditioning coach. And I realized there's so many exercises that we don't learn about as cheerleaders that could 100% help us.
Yeah.
Like all those Olympic lifts, if we learned how to do those at a young age, we would definitely be set up for success, especially our male cheerleaders doing co-ed stunting. Those are the same exact body movements, basically.
A power clean is toss to hands.
Exactly. And for those males who maybe were in All-Star their whole life or didn't come from the football team or wherever we find our male cheerleaders, they don't know to do that. And that could be such a huge help.
Creating muscle development as early as you can has so much benefit, and it creates the right technique, which will translate to creating the right technique on the mat and during practice, right? But it also goes back to the fuel. You can't build right. Yeah, you can't have the gains that you want. You can't build the strength and build the muscle if you're eating candy all day.
Right.
Or not enough.
Yeah, or if you're not eating enough, you're not going to be able to build muscle. Instead, you're going to lose muscle. And that's what I think we see happen to cheerleaders a lot. You might not know it's happening. I mean, with me, I was always very secretive about it. And you couldn't tell from the outside that I was struggling. I never had that 6-pack abs, but I was struggling and no one knew. Instead, it was encouraged even. And I think that's a big issue because I did lose a lot of muscle and I ended up losing skills and getting injured. And that's kind of a common theme with a lot of people.
It is. And I think when people think of working out, especially with females, they see the picture in their head of somebody on stage at a bodybuilding competition. And they don't want to look like that. So they're not going to work out because that's what they see.
Right.
But
and that's not the case.
How much do you have to eat to look like that? That's the trick, right? You have to eat so much protein in order to build. And even then, it's mostly genetics.
Right. And they they do special diets too when it comes with those bodybuilders. And that's not what we're prescribing here. The goal for us is not to look like those bodybuilders, even though, because they are on these specific diets and specific training schedules that are just not attainable for cheerleaders at the moment, especially if they're in their sport.
Right.
But the key is they are working out and they are eating in a certain way.
Right.
And yes, our cheerleaders do not want to look like bodybuilders. And I completely understand that. They don't have to look like bodybuilders. That's not the point. There should be that less emphasis on how a cheerleader looks. It should more be about how they feel, how strong they are mentally, and physically.
Yeah, because this is a sport where you lift people. You have to be strong.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like a lot of the emphasis is on the flyers to be smaller rather than the bases to be stronger. And that's, I think, where a lot of these disordered eating issues come from. And also just not being educated on it enough, not talking about it. It still being taboo. I'm so glad that you're doing this because it opens up the conversation. And that's what really needs to happen to make a change.
Well, I feel it's important. And I feel that this is probably one of the more important topics in our industry. With everything going on right now, we talk about safety and safety for the athletes. Over everything else, it's about safety. This is something that needs to be talked about more because if their mindset isn't right and they have an unhealthy mindset and their mental health is skewed because of what they're supposed to look like, then that's an internal battle that no one can see. You said yourself that no one knew about your issues and you didn't want to talk about them because of why?
Because it was not talked about or it was seen as like a normal thing. And that's the other issue. Like sometimes it's not talked about at all, which goes hidden. And then other times it's talked about so much that it seems normal. Your actions are validated. And it's just a shame. But I think the biggest thing, and this is what I talk about in that first lesson, is a mindset shift.
Yeah.
You start thinking of ourselves like the athletes we are. If you look at the definition of an athlete, it says they practice, they train, they compete. That's what do? We practice multiple days a week. We train often and we compete against other teams across the country. Like that is the definition of what an athlete is. That is the definition of what a sport is.
And let's throw in for schools, game days.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Like a game day, I remember I had to be at the game 4 hours before kickoff. 4 hours. And then obviously the game is 3 to 4 hours itself. Mm-hmm. So that's a long, long day. And we need to be fueled just like the athletes that are on the field, the football players. They are on top of their nutrition. They have dietitians at every practice, every game, at every training session, every lift. Okay,
so and I'm sorry I keep going in different directions here, but I can geek out about this all day. So when you're at a game, say 3 to 4 hours, how often can you eat?
I'll tell you, it was tough. I mean, this is when I was struggling myself, and a lot of it came from other influences around me. So 4 hours before the game, we get there, we do a quick warm up. Then we have all these appearances and stuff. But I had my backpack with me the whole time. There's no reason why I couldn't throw a granola bar or an apple or a banana in there and my water bottle and take that with me through every appearance I had to do. They never said anything about you couldn't eat in a uniform. So that's your first opportunity, is when have that downtime before the game, in between appearances, while you're walking around the tailgates and handing out stickers. This is ample time to fuel. And not to mention before you get to the game. I know for a 12 o'clock game, that means you have to get there at 8. It's early, but you still need to eat a full breakfast. I can't stress that enough, because that is what's going to start your day. That's going to set you up for success. Then during the game, it gets a little harder. But one great thing is there's usually sports drinks there, right? So sports drinks have the carbohydrates and electrolytes you need. So that will give you a boost of energy. That is fuel. So take advantage of that sports drink while you're on the field. And then during halftime is usually when we eat. I know for me, during the time, I did a very bad thing, and I fell into kind of the peer pressure of athletes around me. And we got sandwiches, and so many of us would take off the bread off sandwiches. I can't tell you how much I regret that. It was probably the worst thing I could do because carbs are our main fuel for exercise, especially on game days because they're so long. That is what is going to fuel us. And the meat in a sandwich is not going to be enough. Yeah. So use that opportunity to fuel. And if I was smart then, I would also have had a granola bar and probably another sports drink, especially in like hot climates during game day. Like I obviously went to South Carolina, very hot on game day.
Yeah, August is no joke here in the South.
And you wouldn't be surprised, but a lot of people would pass out on the sidelines or like feel dizzy and not feel great. And it was because we were underfueled and not hydrated. And it's funny looking back at it and looking now, knowing all the research around cheerleading. I mean, there isn't a ton, but there is some, and there is some on college cheerleaders specifically. And one, they found that we burn more calories in a practice than soccer players, female soccer players, when compared against them. And majority of college cheerleading athletes were in a state of low energy availability. And this is what I talk about in that underfueling lesson, what that is. So that is basically meaning that they don't have enough energy to sustain their exercise demands with the energy that is needed to run the body, to keep the body alive. Mm-hmm. So they are either eating just enough to keep their body alive or maybe even not that, because the focus is, looking good in that uniform and posting their things on Instagram and TikTok and Twitter. Like that's what emphasis is on. And it should be on the fact that we are athletes. We are just as much as athletes as the football players that are on the field.
Yeah.
And that means we need to fuel our bodies like we are the football players on the field.
That's gold. And you're 100% correct. Unfortunately, what people don't understand is if you don't eat enough, you're doing more damage to look a certain way than you're wanting to achieve your goal.
100%.
And that's where that kind of goes back to the mindset too, of empowering each other and empowering the athletes to eat enough of the right foods. It's amazing because when I started with a nutritionist, growing up, it was always, low fat, eat less carbs, or eat less calories than you put out. But now it's like, well, the less calories you take in, the more damage you're doing to your body. And you have to set a certain guideline of how much is healthy for you and what's dangerous. She even upped my calories and I was losing weight.
Yep.
And it was blowing my mind because I was trying to wrap my head around, I look at studies as much as I can, and I'll listen to experts like yourself that have knowledge that are smarter in this area than I am. And I'm like, I just can't wrap my head around eating more and still losing weight. But I did.
It's because you're fueling your body, you're fueling your muscles. So they're able to work and they are able to get your body to where it's supposed to be. When the issue is that there's all these fad diets, like you said, the low fat, low carb, all these things that are marketed out to the, normal population. So regular people, not athletes. And the diet industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
For
a reason. They are there to make money. That's all they care about. They do not care about your health. I'll tell you that straight up. I don't care. People come at me for saying that. I believe it true, and it's true. And we are, again, going back to that mindset shift, remembering that we are athletes. So when someone is telling us, oh, you need a 1,200 calorie diet. 1,200 calorie diet is what a toddler should be eating. Wow. So if you put that into perspective, especially athletes that are in high school, in middle school, they're still growing. That means you're going to need probably 2 to 3 times that, both being that you're growing and being that you're athletes. And you're burning so many calories in practice that you need to not only replenish those calories, but eat beyond that so you can grow your muscles and you can get stronger and you can grow as a person in general.
Are there studies out there, which I'm sure there is, but that can show how much damage a high school athlete endures on their body by not eating enough?
So it's hard looking at high school athletes because they're underage. So there isn't as many studies looking at the negatives of that. But there are studies, a ton of studies on low energy availability. So that's right. What you're talking about, that show how detrimental it is. And I go over all of the consequences of underfueling in that video.
Okay. Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
So that just shows all the things that can happen when you're in the low states. And that is all, of course, I get all my information from studies. Everything's researched. Everything's backed by, all evidence-based.
So because of the age, we don't know how much damage is being done to their growth and development long-term because of underfueling, right?
It's hard to tell. There probably are some studies out there, none that I have come across myself, and definitely none that are on cheerleaders of that level.
But we know that it's happening. There's a hindrance to their development and their growth because of the food that they take in.
100%. There's many consequences in the body when it comes to underfueling, from loss of your menstrual cycle. That is a big one, especially for females, because, that contributes to your hormones, that contributes to your bone health. There's a wide variety. It's also underfueling can lead to cardiovascular deficits, psychological deficits, growth and development deficits. You're not able to grow as big if you're not eating enough. If you think about it, we're not plants. So plants get their energy from their sun, right? Every human gets their energy from food. That's the only way we get our energy. So if we don't get that food, we're not going to have not only the energy, but the capacity in our body to grow into humans, to be who we are, and definitely not to play our sport.
I hope you've enjoyed part one of my interview with Ashley Steinberger on how we can start changing the mindset in our industry. We have part two coming up next week, and to be honest, we have only scratched the surface on what we get into in that one. We will do a deep dive into sports nutrition for cheerleading and the proper hydration and so much more. So be sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss it as soon as it drops next week. Until then, I hope this serves you. And if it has, please share it so we can get the message out to as many in our industry as we possibly can. Our mission here at CCA is to provide every cheerleading coach in the world the resources to build their confidence and keep their athletes safe on and off the mat. So the more people that can access our content, hopefully the more impact that we can make. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you soon with part two.